My grandfather left me one locked drawer. It destroyed their entire HOA. I inherited 960 acres expecting nothing more than an old ranch, quiet hills, and the memories my grandfather left behind. Instead, I found a steel gate welded across my own driveway and an HOA president telling me I had no right to enter my own land. She called 911, convinced the law would protect her. What she didn't know was that my grandfather had spent decades leaving behind the one thing that could bring down everything they had built. Before this is over, an entire community will discover who really owns the only road they depend on. And if you enjoy stories where ordinary people stand their ground with patience, evidence, and the law instead of anger, take a second to subscribe. There are plenty more true to the heartland HOA battles waiting just ahead. 2 days after my grandfather's funeral, someone called 911 because I tried to drive onto my own land. The strange part wasn't the flashing patrol lights waiting at the entrance to my ranch. It was the brand new steel gate welded across the gravel driveway where my grandfather had spent 50 years waving neighbors through without ever locking it once. If you've ever watched someone claim something they had no right to own, then you already know what came next. My name is Ethan Walker. I'm 47 years old, born and raised in western Montana, and until 2 days earlier, my biggest concern had been honoring the man who taught me that land isn't something you truly possess. It simply trusts you long enough to care for it. When my grandfather passed away, he left me 960 acres of ranch land tucked between rolling timber and a narrow valley outside Cedar Bluff. The deed had been recorded that same morning at the county office. I folded the certified papers into a large envelope and slid them behind the seat of my pickup before making the drive home. I expected silence. I expected old fence posts leaning against the wind. I expected the familiar dirt road disappearing between ponderosa pines exactly the way I'd remembered it since I was 10 years old. Instead, I rounded the last bend and slammed on my brakes. A steel barrier stretched completely across the entrance. Fresh concrete anchored thick square posts into the ground. Heavy hinges gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. A keypad had been bolted beside the gate, and mounted above it hung a polished aluminum sign. Cedar Bluff Hope Revate Community Access. Unauthorized entry prohibited. For a long second, I honestly wondered if I'd taken the wrong road. Then I looked left. The old split-rail fence Grandpa built himself still followed the property line. I looked right. The weathered cottonwood tree with lightning scars still leaned over the ditch exactly where it always had. No. This wasn't the wrong road. Someone had installed an HOA gate across Walker Ranch. I climbed out of the truck and walked toward the steel bars, boots crunching against gravel. The welds were still bright enough to smell of burned metal. They hadn't just closed my driveway. They'd built something permanent. A bright orange notice had been zip-tied to the center of the gate. Notice of non-compliance. According to Cedar Bluff Homeowners Association regulations, unauthorized agricultural access, livestock operations, and non-approved structures are prohibited beyond this point, pending community compliance review. I read it twice. Then I laughed once. Not because it was funny. Because it was so absurd, my brain refused to believe another explanation existed. The sound of tires rolling across gravel interrupted the silence. A white luxury SUV eased to a stop behind my pickup. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out wearing pressed khaki slacks, polished boots, and a navy blazer despite the summer heat. She carried a leather portfolio under one arm and walked with the confidence of someone who expected every conversation to end in her favor. She stopped several feet away. "You must be Ethan Walker." I nodded once. "And you are?" She smiled politely without warmth. "Rebecca Sloan, president of Cedar Bluff Homeowners Association." I glanced behind her toward the valley where rooftops peaked above the trees. "I think you're lost." "No, she replied evenly. Actually, you're the one attempting to enter HOA-controlled property. I stared at her for several seconds. Then I pointed at the gate. This road has belonged to my family since 1958. Our survey records indicate otherwise. My survey records disagree. She opened the portfolio and removed several printed pages. Our updated community boundary places this access corridor inside Cedar Bluff's managed jurisdiction. Managed jurisdiction? I repeated. Correct. I folded my arms. My grandfather ran cattle through this road before your HOA even existed. Ownership history doesn't exempt current compliance requirements. I couldn't help smiling. You welded a gate across my driveway. We secured community infrastructure. You trespassed. We exercised lawful authority. That word settled between us. Authority. She said it as if repeating it often enough would make it true. I stepped closer until my hand rested on the cold steel bar. This gate comes down today. Rebecca didn't flinch. If you damage HOA property, I'll have no choice but to contact law enforcement. I looked directly into her eyes. You called my ranch HOA property. It falls within our expansion district. No, I said quietly. It doesn't. She adjusted the papers in her portfolio. I understand property transitions can be emotional. This isn't emotion. I tapped the steel gate. This is trespassing. Before she answered, her eyes drifted toward my pickup. The certified estate envelope had slipped partially into view behind the driver's seat. From where she stood, the bold lettering was easy to read. Estate of Samuel Walker. The color drained from her face. Not dramatically, just enough. A tightening around her jaw. A slight hesitation before her next breath. She looked back at me. You inherited this property? 2 days ago, the estate transfer is complete? This morning. She said nothing. For the first time since climbing out of her SUV, Rebecca Sloan looked uncertain. It lasted maybe a second. Then the polished smile returned. That changes nothing, she said. New ownership remains subject to HOA governance. I reached up, tore the orange violation notice from the gate, folded it once and tucked it into my jacket pocket. No, I said calmly. It changes everything. Her expression hardened. I'll notify the sheriff that you're refusing compliance. Go ahead. She blinked. You don't seem concerned. I'm not. She studied me carefully, as though recalculating something that no longer added up. Finally, she closed her portfolio. This isn't over, Mr. Walker. I know. She turned without another word and climbed back into the SUV. As she drove away, dust rolled across the road, leaving me alone with the steel gate blocking the entrance to land my family had owned for generations. I didn't stand there wondering whether I could remove it. I stood there wondering something far more dangerous. Rebecca Sloan hadn't reacted when I challenged her authority. She hadn't reacted when I called her bluff. She reacted the instant she saw my grandfather's name. She already knew something about Walker Ranch, something she desperately hoped I didn't. And I intended to find out exactly what it was. I left the truck where it sat, backed up against the welded gate, and followed the narrow trail that cut through the timber toward the ranch house. My grandfather had used that footpath for years, whenever spring runoff washed out the driveway. The HOA had blocked the road, but they hadn't blocked 960 acres of Montana. The house stood exactly as he'd left it. The porch swing creaked softly when I stepped onto the boards. His old work gloves still rested beside the door, cracked with age but neatly folded. Whoever had built that gate hadn't dared come this far onto the property. Inside, the ranch smelled faintly of leather, pine, and old paper. I didn't waste time unpacking. Rebecca Sloan hadn't looked frightened because she'd seen me. She'd looked frightened because she'd seen the Walker name. That meant the answer wasn't outside. It was somewhere inside this house. Grandpa had never thrown away a document in his life. Tax receipts, cattle records, fence permits, handwritten notes. If it involved the ranch, he kept it. His office sat at the end of the hallway, the only room where every shelf remained perfectly organized. One thing immediately caught my attention. The old steel filing cabinet was locked. That had never happened before. Lying on top was a yellow envelope with my name written across it, in my grandfather's unmistakable handwriting. Ethan. Open this only if someone questions who owns this land. My pulse quickened. I tore the envelope open. Inside rested a small brass key and a folded note. If Cedar Bluff ever claims this ranch, don't argue. Don't trust their maps. Go to the bottom drawer. Everything you need is there. The truth survives longer than loud people. Grandpa. I stood there reading those words twice. He hadn't written if someone trespasses. He hadn't written if the neighbors complain. He wrote one specific name, Cedar Bluff. He'd seen this coming. I slid the brass key into the bottom drawer. The lock clicked open. Inside were dozens of neatly bundled folders tied with faded twine. Everyone carried dates stretching back nearly 30 years. Survey plats, county correspondence, certified mailing receipts, engineering sketches. One folder sat alone on top. Across the tab my grandfather had written in thick black marker. Cedar Bluff Expansion. I carried it to the desk and opened it carefully. The first document wasn't a deed. It was a county rejection notice. Application denied. Proposed subdivision overlaps privately owned Walker Ranch parcels. My eyes narrowed. Beneath it lay another letter dated 6 months later. Another denial. Then another. Each one referenced proposed expansion beyond approved boundaries. None carried approval. Whoever built Cedar Bluff had been told repeatedly not to cross onto Walker land. Yet somehow they had. Near the bottom of the folder I found something even more valuable. A large hand-drawn survey covered with my grandfather's red pencil notes. He had circled entire sections of what now existed as Cedar Bluff. Clubhouse, community park, utility corridor. Then, written beside one thick red line, no easement ever granted. A knock echoed against the front door. 3 sharp raps. Not friendly, not hesitant. I folded the survey closed. Another knock followed. Louder this time. "Mr. Walker," a woman's voice called through the door. "Rebecca Sloan, I believe we still have compliance issues to discuss." I slipped the survey back into the folder, locked the drawer, and pocketed the brass key. When I opened the front door only halfway, Rebecca stood on the porch with 2 HOA board members carrying clipboards. She smiled. It looked practiced. "We'd like to review your property records." "No." Her smile tightened. "I'm afraid cooperation is required." "No," I repeated. "This ranch isn't part of your HOA. Our surveys disagree. I've started reading some older surveys." For the briefest instant, every trace of color disappeared from her face. One of the board members looked toward her. Rebecca answered too quickly. "Those documents are outdated. I haven't told you which documents." Silence. The kind that says more than an argument ever could. She recovered, straightened her blazer, and held out another orange notice. "You have 72 hours to comply." I accepted the paper without reading it. "Anything else?" "You'll regret resisting us." "I don't think I will." She studied me one last time, not with confidence anymore, with calculation, as if she were trying to determine how much I'd already uncovered. When their SUV finally disappeared down the dirt road, I looked back toward the locked filing cabinet. My grandfather hadn't simply left me a ranch. He'd left me a case. And somewhere inside those decades of paperwork was the reason Cedar Bluff had panicked the moment a Walker inherited this land again. I intended to uncover every page, no matter who it buried. By sunrise, every document from my grandfather's filing cabinet was stacked neatly across the dining room table. Survey plats, county correspondence, certified mail receipts, engineering sketches. They weren't random records. They were a timeline. Every few years, Cedar Bluff had tried to push farther onto Walker Ranch. Every few years, someone at the county had pushed back. The one thing I needed was confirmation from someone whose word would carry weight in court. That meant Owen Pierce. Owen had served as the county surveyor for nearly 30 years. My grandfather trusted exactly 3 government employees in his lifetime, and Owen was one of them. When I walked into the county survey office carrying 2 bankers' boxes full of records, Owen looked up from his drafting table and frowned. I was wondering when I'd see a Walker walk through that door again. "You knew my grandfather expected this?" He sighed. I hoped he'd be wrong. He cleared a large table, and together we spread out my grandfather's original surveys beside the county's modern GIS maps. Owen worked without saying much, measuring coordinates, checking parcel numbers, overlaying digital boundaries with paper records that were older than some of the houses in Cedar Bluff. After nearly an hour, he leaned back. Well, he didn't finish the sentence. Instead, he rotated the computer monitor toward me. The aerial image of Cedar Bluff filled the screen. Then he clicked one layer. A thick red boundary appeared. Walker Ranch. The line didn't stop at the edge of the neighborhood. It ran straight through it. My stomach tightened. The clubhouse. Inside my property. The recreation field. Inside my property. The maintenance yard. Inside my property. Then Owen zoomed farther out. "There," he said quietly. I followed his cursor. The only paved entrance leading from Highway 93 into Cedar Bluff stretched nearly 3/4 of a mile. Every foot of it sat inside Walker Ranch. I stared at the screen. They built their entire subdivision using my road. They built their subdivision using your grandfather's road, Owen corrected. He opened another county file. I've been looking for this. Across the top was a stamped application dated 26 years earlier. Request for permanent access easement. Status, denied. Another application. Denied. Another. Withdrawn. A final letter from the County Planning Commission read, "Development may not proceed without recorded easement granted by Samuel Walker." I looked up. My grandfather never signed one. Owen slowly shook his head. No, so how did they build? They built first, and hoped no one would ever challenge it. Before I could answer, someone knocked lightly on the open office door. Sheriff Daniel Holt stepped inside. "Ethan." I nodded. "Sheriff, I heard Rebecca Sloan filed another complaint this morning." "What complaint?" "Claimed you're threatening HOA property." I almost laughed. "They welded a gate across my driveway." "I know." He glanced toward Owen's monitor. "What have you two found?" Owen didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pointed toward the road highlighted in red. The sheriff walked closer. His expression changed the instant he understood what he was looking at. "You've got to be kidding me." "I wish I were," Owen replied. Sheriff Holt folded his arms. "If these surveys hold up, and they appear to, you aren't arguing over a fence. No. The whole subdivision depends on this road." The sheriff remained silent for several moments. Finally, he looked directly at me. "Ethan, I need you to hear something." "I'm listening." "This office can't remove that gate." "I figured. It's still a civil dispute." "I know. But if these documents are authentic, and Owen says they are, You've got something far bigger than an HOA trespassing. He tapped the map. They've built an entire community around access they may never have legally owned. The weight of that sentence settled over the room. For the first time since arriving home, I understood why Rebecca Sloan had gone pale when she saw my grandfather's name. She hadn't been worried about the ranch. She'd been worried about everything beyond it. Sheriff Holt looked at me carefully. Don't confront them. I wasn't planning to. Don't remove the gate. I won't. And don't let these records out of your sight. Why? Because once people realize what they actually say, he answered, someone's going to try very hard to make them disappear. I repacked every survey into the boxes and carried them back toward my truck. As I stepped outside, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. Mr. Walker? Speaking. This is Derek Lawson. The name was familiar. One of the largest developers in western Montana. I think, he said smoothly, it's time you and I had a private conversation about your road. I looked back toward the survey office, then toward the red boundary line still burned into my memory. They weren't calling because they wanted peace. They were calling because they finally understood exactly what my grandfather had spent decades protecting. And they were about to find out I wasn't interested in selling ignorance, only the truth. Derek Lawson suggested we meet at the old steakhouse just outside Helena, halfway between my ranch and Cedar Bluff. I almost declined. Then Rachel Monroe called before I could make up my mind. Owen told me what you found, she said. If Lawson wants a meeting, go. You think it's a trap? I think it's an opportunity. To do what? Listen. Rachel's voice remained calm. People hiding fraud usually tell the truth when they believe money will solve the problem. An hour later, I parked my pickup beside 3 luxury SUVs. Derek Lawson greeted me with a practiced smile that never reached his eyes. Beside him stood Trent Holloway, Cedar Bluff's attorney, wearing an expensive gray suit and carrying a leather briefcase. Ethan, Derek said warmly, I appreciate you coming. I came to hear what was so urgent. It doesn't have to become adversarial. I pulled out a chair. That depends on what you're about to say. The waitress hadn't even poured coffee before Trent slid a thick contract across the table. We'd like to purchase a portion of Walker Ranch. I don't recall putting any land on the market. This benefits everyone. I opened the first page. The offer was staggering. Nearly 3 times what similar ranch property had sold for anywhere in the county. Enough money to tempt almost anyone. Generous, Derek said. It isn't generosity, I replied. It's motivation. He smiled. We recognize your family has sentimental attachment. My grandfather wasn't sentimental. He was difficult. I looked up slowly. My grandfather protected his property. Trent leaned forward. This agreement allows everyone to move forward peacefully. I continued reading. Page after page looked ordinary. Purchase price, closing costs, property description. Then halfway through the contract, one sentence caught my attention. Buyer assumes all historical access obligations associated with the existing transportation corridor. Transportation corridor, not road, not driveway. Transportation corridor. I kept reading without reacting. Historical access obligations. Why would anyone include language like that unless they already knew someone else's legal access depended on it? I closed the folder. I'll have my attorney review it. Trent answered immediately. There really isn't anything complicated. Then you won't mind waiting. Derek's smile faded slightly. We'd rather resolve this before unnecessary litigation begins. What litigation? The HOA believes continued interference with community operations could become expensive. I've interfered with nothing. Yet. There it was. Not a negotiation. A warning. I stood. If that's everything, I'm leaving. Derek remained seated. Ethan. I stopped. You don't understand how many families depend on that road. I turned back toward him. Interesting. He frowned. I never mentioned a road. Silence. Trent's head turned toward Derek. Derek realized his mistake the same moment I did. For the first time since we'd met, neither man spoke. You called this meeting to buy land, I said quietly. But what you actually need, I tapped the contract, is access. Neither denied it. Neither confirmed it. They didn't have to. The clause buried inside their own agreement had already done both. I walked out without shaking hands. Rachel Monroe was waiting beside my truck. She hadn't come inside. She simply held out her hand. The contract. I gave it to her. She stood against the tailgate reading every page. When she reached the transportation corridor clause, she smiled for the first time. They just admitted it. That's what I thought. They're terrified. They offered millions. They aren't paying for dirt. She folded the contract carefully. They're paying because the only paved entrance into Cedar Bluff depends on Walker Ranch. I nodded. They know. Rachel looked toward the mountains. No. They know you know. We climbed into the truck. So what now? I asked. We do absolutely nothing they expect. No lawsuit? Not yet. No demand letter? No. She looked directly at me. Instead of selling the road to the people who've abused it, she paused. Let's find someone who actually has a lawful reason to use it. I started the engine. For the first time since inheriting the ranch, I wasn't thinking about defending my property. I was thinking about who could legally replace the HOA's control over it. And somewhere in that answer, Cedar Bluff's entire future was waiting. Rachel didn't waste time. The next morning, she drove onto the ranch carrying a thin folder instead of a briefcase. I made 2 calls last night, she said as she climbed out of her SUV. To who? One to the county. And the other? She smiled. Summit Wildfire Response. I'd heard of them. They managed emergency access routes throughout western Montana, maintaining roads that firefighters and rescue crews relied on during wildfire season. They weren't a developer. They weren't a real estate company. They specialized in infrastructure, exactly the kind of organization that had a legitimate reason to control a mountain access road. They've been looking for another operational corridor through this valley for almost 3 years, Rachel explained. Your grandfather turned down several meetings because he didn't want heavy equipment crossing cattle pastures. I remember him mentioning something about emergency routes. He wasn't opposed to helping. He was opposed to giving away ownership. An hour later, a convoy of white trucks rolled slowly through the ranch using an old maintenance trail that bypassed the welded HOA gate. Their lead engineer introduced himself. Carl Jensen. He shook my hand firmly. Mr. Walker, thank you for meeting with us. I led him toward the ridge overlooking Cedar Bluff. From there, the entire valley spread beneath us. Carl unfolded a topographic map. We're evaluating one thing. The road. He nodded. If this corridor performs the way county records suggest, it becomes one of the safest emergency access routes in this region. His team spent the next several hours measuring pavement width, checking bridge ratings, verifying drainage, and comparing GPS coordinates against county records. Not once did they ask about the HOA. They cared about logistics, safety, reliability. Near midday, Carl walked back toward me carrying a clipboard. I've got good news. I'm listening. This road exceeds every operational requirement. He pointed toward Cedar Bluff. Our crews could reach 3 separate wildfire zones 15 minutes faster using this corridor. Rachel folded her arms. So? Carl smiled. So Summit Wildfire Response would like to negotiate an exclusive operational management lease. Not ownership? I asked. No. You keep the land. You keep the deed. We simply manage access for emergency operations and maintain the roadway. Exactly what Rachel had hoped for. That afternoon, Summit's legal department emailed over a draft agreement. Rachel read every line twice, then a third time. Finally, she slid it across the kitchen table. This is clean. No hidden clauses? None. No transfer of ownership? No. No permanent easement to Cedar Bluff? Absolutely not. What changes? She looked directly at me. The moment you sign, Summit becomes the lawful operator of the access road. And Cedar Bluff? They stop pretending they're in charge. I picked up the pen. For a moment, I thought about my grandfather. The road. The years he'd spent refusing to surrender rights everyone else assumed they'd eventually take. He hadn't preserved this land, so I'd sell it under pressure. He'd preserved it so I could choose its future. I signed. Rachel signed as witness. Carl signed on behalf of Summit. Just like that. Everything changed. Carl slipped the agreement into his case. Our installation crew arrives tomorrow morning. So soon? We don't delay operational projects. He smiled. Neither should you. After the trucks departed, silence settled across the ranch. The welded HOA gate still stood across my driveway. Rebecca Sloan probably believed it represented control. She had no idea a far more important contract had just been executed less than a mile away. As the sun dipped behind the hills, my phone rang. Rebecca. I answered. Mr. Walker? Rebecca, I've been informed you've had commercial survey crews on your property. That's correct. May I ask why? You may. Silence. Then she asked again. What were they doing? I looked toward the distant entrance road winding through Walker Ranch. Preparing for tomorrow. She hesitated. What happens tomorrow? I smiled despite myself. I think you'll find out around sunrise. Before she could ask another question, I ended the call. Some battles are won with arguments. Others are won with paperwork signed before your opponent even realizes the game has changed. Tomorrow morning, Cedar Bluff would wake up believing they still owned the only road into their community. By breakfast, they would discover it answered to someone else. At 6:15 the next morning, the first Summit wildfire response trucks rolled onto Walker Ranch. There were no flashing lights, no dramatic speeches, just a crew that worked with quiet efficiency. Within an hour, the old HOA gate that Rebecca Sloan had installed across my driveway had been removed under the terms of Summit's operational agreement. A few hundred yards farther down the road, where the paved entrance met Highway 93, workers erected a modern security checkpoint with a retractable barrier, license plate cameras, and a small operations booth. Everything happened on property legally covered by the agreement Rachel had reviewed. Every permit was already on file with the county. By 7 o'clock, the first Cedar Bluff resident drove toward the exit in a silver SUV. He slowed, rolled down his window, and looked at the uniformed Summit employee. Morning, the employee said politely. This roadway is under Summit Wildfire Response Operational Management. May I see your access authorization? The driver laughed. I live here. I understand, sir. I'm afraid residence alone doesn't establish roadway authorization. The smile disappeared from the driver's face. What are you talking about? Please pull into the inspection lane while we verify access. Within minutes, another vehicle arrived. Then another. Luxury SUVs, pickup trucks, parents trying to take children to school. Cars began lining up along the entrance road. Nobody understood what was happening. I watched from the ridge above the ranch beside Rachel Monroe. She lowered a pair of binoculars. It won't take long. For what? For Rebecca. She was right. Less than 10 minutes later, a white luxury SUV came flying around the curve far faster than anyone should have driven through a residential neighborhood. Rebecca Sloan slammed on her brakes and stormed toward the checkpoint. What is the meaning of this? The summit supervisor calmly handed her a laminated information sheet. This roadway is now under the operational management of Summit Wildfire Response LLC. Absolutely not. I'm afraid it is. This road belongs to Cedar Bluff HOA. No, ma'am, it does not. She snatched the paper from his hand. This is private community infrastructure. It is private property, owned by Walker Ranch. She spun around just as I walked toward the checkpoint with Rachel. You. Her voice carried across the line of waiting vehicles. What have you done? I signed a legal agreement. You had no authority. I own the road. You do not. Rachel stepped forward. My client owns the underlying property. The county recognizes Summit's operational lease. Rebecca ignored her. You can't simply hand our entrance to another company. I didn't hand over ownership. I leased operational control. There's a difference. She stared at me in disbelief. You planned this. I planned to protect my property. Residents had begun leaving their vehicles. People gathered around us asking questions all at once. What's going on? Why can't we leave? Who owns this road? Rebecca pointed at me. He's interfering with HOA operations. No, Rachel replied evenly. The HOA has been interfering with Mr. Walker's property rights. Rebecca pulled out her phone. Fine. If you think this is legal, she pressed 3 numbers. We'll let the sheriff decide. 20 minutes later, Sheriff Daniel Holt pulled into the checkpoint. He stepped out slowly, taking in the security booth, the Summit vehicles, the line of frustrated residents, and finally me. Morning, Ethan. Morning, Sheriff. Rebecca intercepted him before he reached us. They've blocked our road. I need you to remove them immediately. Sheriff Holt accepted the folder the Summit supervisor handed him. Inside were the recorded lease, the county permits, proof of ownership, and survey maps. He read every page. Nobody spoke. Even the residents waited quietly. Finally, he closed the folder. Rebecca crossed her arms. Well? The sheriff looked directly at her. Ma'am, this is a lawful operational agreement. Her face tightened. Then order them to open the road. I can't. You have authority. I have authority over criminal matters. This isn't one. She took a step toward him. Families are trapped. They're not trapped. They're being asked to comply with the lawful operating procedures established by the property's authorized manager. She shook her head. This is ridiculous. The HOA owns this road. Sheriff Holt slowly handed her the survey map. No, it doesn't. Silence swept through the crowd. One homeowner stepped closer. If the HOA doesn't own it, he looked from Rebecca to me, then who does? I answered before Rebecca could. My family always has. Nobody spoke. Not Rebecca, not the residents, not even the sheriff. Because every person standing there understood exactly what that meant. And for the first time since Cedar Bluff was built, its future no longer belonged to the HOA. The silence after my words lasted only a few seconds. Then the questions started. What do you mean your family owns the road? Rebecca, is that true? Why were we never told? Rebecca raised both hands, trying to reclaim the authority she'd worn so comfortably just a day earlier. "Everyone, please remain calm. This is a temporary legal misunderstanding." Rachel stepped beside me. "No," she said evenly. "It's a property dispute supported by county records." Rebecca glared at her. "Your client is manipulating decades of paperwork." Rachel didn't answer. Instead, she handed Sheriff Holt a sealed county envelope. "I requested certified archive copies yesterday." The sheriff opened the packet while a crowd of anxious homeowners watched. Inside were photocopies of original county filings, each bearing official recording stamps. Sheriff Holt scanned the first page, then looked toward Owen Pierce, who had just arrived carrying a long survey tube under one arm. "Owen?" The surveyor nodded. "I brought the originals." He spread a large survey across the hood of a patrol SUV. Residents instinctively gathered closer. "This is Walker Ranch," Owen explained, tracing the heavy boundary line with one finger. "This is Cedar Bluff." He pointed farther down the map. "And this," his finger rested on the entrance road, "has always remained inside Walker Ranch." Rebecca folded her arms. "Old surveys don't control modern developments." "They do," Owen replied calmly, "unless they're legally amended." He removed another document. "I searched every county record from the last 30 years. He looked directly at Rebecca. "I found no recorded easement." No one spoke. Owen reached into the tube again. "But I did find something else." He unfolded a thin engineering plat dated nearly 25 years earlier. Across the bottom sat a familiar signature: Rebecca Sloan. A homeowner beside me frowned. "Wait, Rebecca wasn't HOA president back then?" Rachel nodded. "She wasn't. She served as secretary for the original expansion committee." Rebecca's face tightened. "That proves nothing." Rachel produced another folder. "It proves quite a bit." She laid several certified documents across the hood. This filing approved interior landscaping. This one authorized utility placement. And this one, she paused, certified that the HOA possessed legal authority over the expansion area. Rachel tapped the signature line. "Signed by Rebecca Sloan." Rebecca immediately shook her head. "I signed what our developer gave me." "You certified ownership. I certified what I believed." "Did you verify it?" Silence. Rachel asked again. "Did you verify that Cedar Bluff legally possessed access rights across Walker Ranch?" Rebecca looked away. "I relied on professionals." "Which professionals?" No answer. Another homeowner stepped forward. "My husband and I bought our home 18 years ago. You told us the HOA owned every common area." Another voice joined in. "Our dues paid for road maintenance." A third. "You said the road belonged to the association." Rebecca's confidence began unraveling. "I acted in good faith." Rachel calmly opened one final folder. "We subpoenaed the engineering firm's archived invoices." She removed a single page. "Paid in full by Derek Lawson Development." Every head turned. Derek had arrived only moments earlier and now stood several yards away near his SUV. He looked like he wanted to disappear. Rachel continued. "The same engineering firm prepared the expansion certification Rebecca signed, and they billed Mr. Lawson directly." Derek finally spoke. "That doesn't mean I knew every document they prepared." "No," Rachel agreed. "But it does connect the developer, the surveys, and the HOA expansion." Sheriff Holt closed the file slowly. "I think we're past misunderstandings. The residents did too. Questions became accusations. You knew. Did you ever check? Were we paying dues for land the HOA didn't even own?" Rebecca backed toward her SUV. "I never intended to deceive anyone." "But you signed it!" someone shouted. She looked around desperately, searching for support. Instead, she found only angry homeowners staring back. The authority she'd built over 2 decades wasn't collapsing because of me. It was collapsing because one signature had survived longer than every excuse she could invent. And if the residents were finally asking questions, the courthouse would soon demand answers. By noon, Cedar Bluff stopped looking like a private community and started looking like a crime scene made of manicured lawns. Residents gathered along the road with phones in their hands and fear in their faces. Some filmed the summit checkpoint. Others confronted Rebecca near the HOA monument, where the gold letters of Cedar Bluff suddenly looked less like status and more like evidence. A local news van pulled up first, then a second. By the time Rachel and I reached the clubhouse, cameras were pointed at the entrance and homeowners were demanding a board meeting. Rebecca tried to refuse. The residents didn't let her. They packed the clubhouse until people stood along the walls, shoulder to shoulder, holding HOA dues statements, warning letters, and copies of road maintenance assessments they had paid for years. Rebecca stood at the front beside Derek Lawson. Trent Holloway was not there. That told me plenty. A woman in the second row raised her hand, trembling with anger. My husband and I paid a special assessment for road resurfacing last spring. $5,000. If the HOA didn't own the road, where did that money go? Rebecca gripped the podium. Those funds were used for community infrastructure. A man near the back shouted, "Infrastructure you didn't own?" The room erupted. Derek stepped forward, palms out. "Everyone needs to understand this is a complex legal matter." "No," Rachel said from beside me. "It's a title matter." The room quieted. Rachel laid certified documents across the front table. "Here are the county records. Here are the denied easement applications. Here are the original Walker Ranch surveys. And here is the operational lease between Ethan Walker and Summit Wildfire Response." Rebecca snapped. "You have no right to hijack our meeting." Rachel didn't even look at her. "The court will decide rights, but the residents deserve facts today." A silence fell that felt heavier than shouting. I stepped forward. Until that moment, most of those people had looked at me like I was the man who had blocked their lives. Now they looked at me like someone holding the only map out of a burning building. "I know you're angry," I said. "You should be, but not at me." Rebecca scoffed. "You created this crisis." "No." I pointed toward the road. I revealed one. That landed hard. A father standing near the aisle spoke next. "My kids missed school today because no one told us the only road was disputed." Then an older woman held up a folder. "My HOA dues went up every year for road maintenance." Another resident added, "Rebecca told us Walker Ranch had abandoned access rights." Every head turned. Rebecca's face tightened. I said there were unresolved historical issues. "No," the woman replied. "You said the HOA had full control." Derek quietly stepped backward toward the wall. I noticed. So did Rachel. She turned to him. "Mr. Lawson, since your development firm funded the expansion survey, perhaps you'd like to explain why no recorded easement exists." Derek's mouth opened. No words came out. The room exploded again. For the first time, Rebecca wasn't facing me. She was facing the people who had trusted her, people who had paid fines, paid dues, paid assessments, people who thought they were buying into security and discovered they had bought into a lie. One man turned toward me, eyes tired. "Are you going to take our homes?" The question changed the room. The anger paused. Even Rebecca looked at me. I answered without hesitation. "No." A murmur spread. I raised my voice just enough. "You were lied to. But you didn't build those roads, forge those filings, or bury those easements." I looked across the room. I'm not here to punish families. I'm here to stop the people who used my land and your money without telling either of us the truth. Some faces softened. Others broke. An older couple in the front row held hands like they had been waiting all morning for one sentence that let them breathe. Rachel placed a hand on the evidence folder. Tomorrow morning, Judge Margaret Ellis will hear our emergency petition. Until then, I recommend every resident demand copies of all HOA financial records, survey documents, road maintenance invoices, and board communications. That turned fear into action. People started writing, recording, asking better questions. Rebecca stepped away from the podium, pale and furious. Her authority had not been taken by force. It had been withdrawn by the very homeowners who once obeyed it. When we left the clubhouse, the summit checkpoint still stood at the road. But the real barrier had moved. It no longer stood between Cedar Bluff and the highway. It stood between the residents and the truth their HOA could no longer hide. Tomorrow, that truth would enter a courtroom, and this time, Rebecca Sloan wouldn't be able to gavel it quiet. By 9 o'clock the next morning, the county courthouse was standing room only. Homeowners from Cedar Bluff filled nearly every bench. Reporters lined the back wall with notebooks and cameras. The hallway outside buzzed with whispered conversations about forged surveys, missing easements, and the road everyone had assumed belonged to the HOA. Rachel Monroe sat beside me at the plaintiff's table, her files arranged in perfect order. Across the aisle, Rebecca Sloan looked exhausted for the first time since I'd met her. Derek Lawson stared down at his notes without reading them. Trent Holloway shuffled through legal binders, searching for arguments that no longer existed. Judge Margaret Ellis entered precisely at 9. The courtroom rose. Once everyone was seated, she wasted no time. Ms. Monroe, proceed. Rachel walked to the evidence table carrying only one binder. Your Honor, this case is not about personality or neighborhood politics. She placed the binder in front of the judge. It is about ownership. One by one, she presented the documents. The original Walker Ranch deed, the rejected easement applications, the certified county surveys, the operational lease with Summit Wildfire response. Finally, she introduced the expansion certification bearing Rebecca Sloan's signature. Judge Ellis examined each page carefully. Then she looked toward Rebecca. Mrs. Sloan. Rebecca stood. Did you sign this certification? Rebecca swallowed. Yes. Did you verify that Cedar Bluff possessed a recorded easement across Walker Ranch before signing? Silence. Judge Ellis repeated the question. No, Rebecca admitted quietly. The courtroom shifted, not loudly, just enough for everyone to realize the first wall had cracked. Rachel continued. Your Honor, I'd like to call County Surveyor Owen Pierce. Owen stepped forward carrying the original survey tube. He explained the boundary overlays, the denied applications, and the absence of any recorded access rights. Judge Ellis interrupted only once. Mr. Pierce, in your professional opinion, who owns the disputed roadway? Walker Ranch. No ambiguity? None. She nodded. Thank you. Trent Holloway rose quickly. Your Honor, regardless of historical paperwork, the HOA has maintained that roadway for decades. Judge Ellis looked at him. Maintenance does not create ownership. Trent tried again. Residents relied on the HOA. They may have, she replied evenly. But reliance cannot replace a recorded deed. Rachel then presented Derek Lawson's purchase contract. She highlighted one clause. Buyer assumes historical access obligations associated with the existing transportation corridor. Judge Ellis looked toward Derek. Mr. Lawson. He stood reluctantly. If your company believed the HOA already owned this road, She tapped the contract. Why include this language? Derek hesitated. It was precautionary. Rachel spoke before he could continue, or acknowledgement. Derek said nothing. The silence answered for him. Rachel rested her hands on the podium. Your Honor, Cedar Bluff operated under authority it never possessed. It collected dues for infrastructure it did not own. It threatened legal action against the rightful landowner. And when Mr. Walker inherited his family's ranch, it attempted to pressure him into surrendering the very access rights it knew were indispensable. Judge Ellis removed her glasses. She looked first at Rebecca, then Derek. Finally, Trent. I have reviewed every exhibit submitted. She paused. The evidence is overwhelming. The room became perfectly still. This court finds that Walker Ranch is the lawful owner of the disputed roadway and surrounding property identified in the original surveys. She lifted the written order. Cedar Bluff HOA is immediately prohibited from asserting authority thus over any portion of Walker Ranch. Rebecca lowered her head. Judge Ellis continued. The court further refers the expansion certifications and related filings to the county attorney for review regarding possible civil and criminal violations. Gasps spread across the courtroom. Derek closed his eyes. Trent slowly lowered himself into his chair. Judge Ellis looked directly at me. Mr. Walker. I stood. You requested restoration of your property rights. Those rights are hereby affirmed. Her gavel struck once. Case decided. Years of intimidation ended in a single sound. As we stepped into the courthouse hallway, reporters rushed toward us. I didn't stop. Neither did Rachel. The only voices I cared about belonged to the homeowners waiting outside, because the legal fight was over. Now came the harder question. What would justice look like for the families who had been deceived right alongside me? Outside the courthouse, reporters crowded the front steps, shouting questions about the ruling. I walked past every microphone. The story they wanted had already happened inside the courtroom. The story I cared about was waiting across the street. Nearly 50 Cedar Bluff homeowners stood together in small groups. Some looked relieved. Others looked terrified. None of them knew what came next. A middle-aged man stepped forward first. Mr. Walker, he said quietly, does this mean we're going to lose our homes? The question silenced everyone. Even the reporters stopped talking. I looked around at the families gathered there. Parents holding children's hands. Retirees who had invested their savings. Young couples who thought they had bought into a secure neighborhood. They weren't the people who forged surveys. They weren't the people who signed false certifications. They had simply trusted the wrong leaders. No, I answered. No one is losing a home because of me. A wave of relief spread across the crowd. Rebecca Sloan, Derek Lawson, and Trent Holloway had treated these families like leverage. I refused to do the same. Rachel Monroe stepped beside me holding a folder. We've already prepared a framework, she said. Several homeowners looked confused. I continued. Over the next several weeks, anyone who wants to remain on their property will have the opportunity to negotiate a fair agreement directly with Walker Ranch. No hidden fees, no surprise assessments, no invented violations. Every agreement will be recorded with the county. An older woman wiped tears from her eyes. I've lived there for 16 years, she whispered. I thought we'd have to leave. You won't, I said. We'll fix this legally. A father who had spoken during the HOA meeting stepped forward. Why would you help us after everything that's happened? I smiled slightly. Because you weren't the ones who welded a gate across my driveway. A few people laughed. The tension finally broke. Sheriff Daniel Holt walked over from the courthouse steps. I've been doing this job a long time, he said. Most property disputes end with neighbors refusing to speak for the next 20 years. He looked at me. You chose a different road. I had a good teacher. Rachel handed me one last envelope, the certified judgment. I looked at the name printed across the top. Walker Ranch. My grandfather had spent decades protecting that title without raising his voice. He trusted that someday the paperwork would matter more than the people trying to ignore it. He was right. A week later, Summit Wildfire Response finalized permanent operating procedures for emergency access. Residents received new access credentials, emergency vehicles moved freely through the corridor, and maintenance became transparent under recorded agreements instead of HOA demands. Within a month, the county appointed an independent administrator to oversee Cedar Bluff, while homeowners elected an entirely new neighborhood association, one with no authority beyond the land it actually owned. Rebecca Sloan resigned before the criminal investigation concluded. Derek Lawson's development company withdrew from every remaining project in the county. Trent Holloway quietly closed his local office. None of that brought me much satisfaction. What mattered was something else. One evening, I drove to the highest ridge on the ranch, where my grandfather and I used to watch cattle drift across the valley. The same road stretched below me. Only now it served exactly the purpose it always should have. Not power, not control. Service. I unfolded the original survey one last time. The edges were worn. The red boundary lines my grandfather had drawn decades earlier remained perfectly clear. He hadn't fought with threats. He hadn't fought with anger. He fought by preserving the truth until someone was willing to read it. I folded the survey carefully and looked across the 960 acres that now felt peaceful again. I kept my promise, Grandpa, I said quietly. The evening breeze carried through the pines, and for the first time since inheriting Walker Ranch, there was nothing left to prove. The gate was gone. The lies were gone. The land had never forgotten who it belonged to. It had only been waiting for someone patient enough to let the truth catch up. And in the end, justice wasn't built by revenge. It was built by deeds, records, and the courage to stand your ground long enough for the facts to speak louder than fear.
If the one lesson I carry away from all of this is that quiet revelation often matter more than loud adjustment. My grandfather never tried to outsell anyone. He simply kept every survey, every letter, and every record because he believed the trust would eventually need of kindness. When the time finally comes, this was an angel that protected all our family lands. It was patent, honesty, and the quietly to let the facts do the talking. That a lesson worth remembering, whether you are protecting a rank, a family home, or simply your good name. Lion has a way for testing people when the least expected. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stay calm, learn aloud, teach other fairly, and refuse to compromise your integrity. In the long run, character lasts longer than power, and just has a way of finding their life. Now, I'd love to hear from you. If you ever had to stand your ground when you knew you were right, drop or were just right in the comment. And if you ever deal with an HOA, a property dispute, or situation where paperwork make all the difference, say your story below. I read as many of your comment and I can. And they are only worth hearing. If story about ordinary people standing with dignity, protecting that there, and fighting just like the right boy mean something to you, I'd be honored if you surprise and join us for the next trip to the Highland, HOA, and bring story. Until next time, take care of yourself and never underestimate the value of knowing that you're truly one.